Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to this plenary lecture in our Grand Challenges Week. What is the greatest, the grandest challenge that you've faced? If I think about my own life, I can identify some periods, some moments when things were very difficult. The moment I decided to leave medicine, to leave clinical practice, to pursue an alternative academic route to happiness and fulfillment. Or perhaps thinking in a sort of longer durée approach, coping with 3 children who have the intelligence, the passion, the obstinacy, the adversarial skills of their mother. No, she's a wonderful woman, seriously. But these are private dilemmas. These are the kinds of challenges that most of us will face at some stage in our lives. If we look up for a moment beyond our own lives to the wider world, then we see another dimension, another level of challenges. In the 21st century, we live in a world in which we fear sometimes for political stability and global security, a world in which many populations still live in poverty without access to clean water, a world in which the environment is gradually being destroyed by human profligacy, a world in which resources and opportunities, whether they're in education, healthcare, or leisure, are not distributed equally or fairly. A world in which, although we are living longer, we are suffering an increasing burden of chronic physical and mental illness. Now, if these are the challenges, how do we tackle them? What are the solutions? And this is at the heart of Grand Challenges at the University of Exeter. I like to think that my generation is probably too old now to make a difference. And that may just be laziness or cowardice. But in some ways, many of the problems that we face now are, of course, the product of my generation. So I think that optimism, that the future, the solutions in the future lie in the hands of our students. And this is the purpose of Grand Challenges, to take our first-year students through a week or two and some months preparation before it, thinking through some of the challenges that modern populations face, equipping them with some of the skills and the experience and the insights to enable today's students to become tomorrow's leaders. That is at the heart of Grand Challenges as an educational venture. We are very fortunate tonight to have a speaker, Alastair Campbell, who can talk about challenges, both personal and political, from a number of directions. Many of us will know Alastair Campbell from his days working with Tony Blair in part of the Labour Party administration as the spokesperson and then Director of Communications and Strategy. But both before and after those years, he has had impressive alternative careers. He started life as a journalist, becoming a very prominent political editor at various newspapers. And it was, of course, those intellectual, pragmatic skills that suited him for the job he did with the Labour Party. And it is those skills that he then has transferred, after that period, into another career, that is writing. He's published a series of volumes of diaries charting some of the experiences during his work with the Labour Party. He's published a very short non-fiction book on the personal and political dimensions of happiness, and he's published 3 novels. And the novels are particularly interesting in the context of one of the grand challenges that we are running here, and that is under the slogan, if you like, the banner, the umbrella term, no health without mental health. And we're asking the students to think through some of the social, the personal, the political issues relating to mental illness in modern societies. The first novel that Alastair Campbell wrote, All in the Mind, traces the story of a psychiatrist who himself has psychological problems. Not an unfamiliar story, I think, in many ways. The most recent book traces the route that a young woman takes into alcoholism and the impact that has on her families and friends. Now, Alastair Campbell has made no secret of the fact that although these are not autobiographical, they draw heavily on some of his personal experiences. And I think throughout his writing, he has demonstrated an honesty and an integrity in the way he's tackled those problems that is commendable. And it's for those reasons that, of course, he has been invited to be a champion for various mental health campaigns. And it is for precisely those reasons that we have invited him here to talk this evening. It's a very great pleasure to introduce to you Alastair Campbell.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to an auditorium that looks like the stands at Burnley. Beautiful colours, really nice colours. I want to wave to Cornwall. There's Cornwall at the back there. They're waving now, you see. It's like the Eurovision Song Contest, this. I know this part of the world quite well because you mentioned I was a journalist, but I trained in Devon and Cornwall. I was a trainee with the West of England newspapers, which was then owned by the Mirror. So I started on a paper called Tavistock Times, circulation 8,000. I was sports editor after 7 hours. So great start to my career. And then I moved to the Sunday Independent in Truro. So I do know this part of the world quite well. I guess if you're asking me to talk about great challenges, lots of great challenges I could talk about, some of which you alluded to, inequality, climate change, some of the really big stuff that's going on in the moment, geopolitics, is Britain in decline, are we coming out of Europe, all of that sort of stuff. But I do want to focus in particular on what I see as the challenge of breaking down the stigma and the taboo that surrounds mental health and mental illness. And I do see this as the last kind of great taboo. I think we will one day look back and just say, did we really used to think like that? I'll give you one example. If somebody hears, I've got quite a lot of friends for various reasons who are psychiatrists, and I was talking to one of them recently who specialises in the treatment of schizophrenia, and he was saying that one of the hardest parts of his job is that when somebody is diagnosed with schizophrenia, is explaining to the patient, but usually with more difficulty to the patient's family, what this disease is not. Schizophrenia equals split personality. No, it doesn't. Schizophrenia is likely to lead to the person with schizophrenia being violent. No, it's not. These are myths that develop because of the way that people have thought about and talked about and written about that specific mental illness. So I think that if you look back, I mean, I guess what I've done first in journalism, then in politics, and what I do now in a very different sort of post-Antichrist life is very much trying to use what I know about campaigning and communication to carry on making change in a different way. And I want to do it in this area because I think it's so important, because I know about it. And the Time to Change campaign, there are lots of people here with Time to Change t-shirts on. Time to Change, which is a mental health awareness campaign. And if you came in through the main entrance, you'd have seen the double elephant tent over there, which is a project based here but funded by Time to Change. And it's trying to change the way that people think about mental health and mental illness. Now, why is there a need to do that? The reason there is a need to do that is because we all have mental health. Now, is there hands up, anybody in this room who has never had to see a doctor? Who's never, ever had to see a doctor? So therefore, I can assume 100% of the people in this room have at some time in their life had a physical health problem, okay? And yet, we're expected to sort of wander around and live our lives as though all of the time, all of us have perfect mental health. We never have a mental health problem. In the Time to Change campaign, we use this figure, 1 in 4. Now, you need figures, you need numbers like that to drive awareness. So the figure we use is 1 in 4 of us will at some time in our life experience an episode of mental illness, okay? Now, I go along with it because I'm a team player, right? But if I'm being absolutely frank, the real number is 1 in 1 of us. There's not a single person in the world who doesn't sometimes have worse mental health than at other times. And of course, the ones that people think of when we talk about mental illness are the ones that we see. You look at somebody who's on the street, who's talking to himself, who's maybe got a dog on a string, and he's clearly not well. Might be alcoholic, might be a drug addict, might just be living on the streets because he's got nowhere to live. And I think sometimes what good, well-educated, nice, middle-class people do is they walk by, they feel very bad for that person, they think it's a bit sad, but there's also a part of us that says, I'm not like that. And that can make us feel actually quite good about ourselves in a different sort of way as well. I walk past that person, and even though I do not do God, I do say to myself, there but for the grace of, go I. Because I know that guy didn't start there. He's gone on an arc of his life, which starts, like we all do, on the day that we're born, and his life has taken him to land on a street with a dog on a string where he is clutching a bottle of cider, which he's bought for next to nothing, which he managed to beg off a few people who walked past his slot a few hours earlier. Okay? That's his life. And wind his life back a bit, and he probably had a job, and he probably had kids, and he might have had a wife, and he had an education, and he had parents. So somewhere along the way, he's gone horribly wrong. Now, so that's one example of somebody who's mentally ill. I mentioned schizophrenia, which is one of the most serious mental illnesses. And again, I know people, I've just met some of the students who are doing the challenges this week, and I was explaining to them, I know somebody who has schizophrenia who's held down the same job very, very successfully for 32 years. It's not a very senior job, but it doesn't matter. He's got a job, he likes his job, he's happy in his job. Funny enough, it's at a university, not this one. But he can hold that job down, and he can function. Why can he function well? Because everybody in that university knows him, and they know about his illness. And when, as sometimes happens, what often happens with people with schizophrenia is they take medication, the medication works, it helps, and then as you start to feel normal, you then start to think, oh, I don't need this medication. I want to be the same as everybody else. I'm fed up with taking these drugs the whole time. You stop taking the drugs, you get ill again. And then he might be sitting in the library at the university and he starts shouting at people who aren't there because he's hearing voices in his mind and he's responding to them. And the people around him, his colleagues and people who are working in the library, they know that. And they know how to deal with that. They know how to react with that because he's been open and the university's been open and they've felt that he had some talent that wasn't just defined by his mental illness. And that's really, really important. One of the teams that I was talking to who are doing this project, better watch out here, they're analysing the university's own approach to mental health. So, could be good, I don't know, but they should come and interview you afterwards. But the thing is that I think employers are so important in this, and I had 2 very, very lucky experiences with my employers. So I started off, went to school, went to university, developed a pretty serious drinking problem while I was at university, left university, got a decent degree, God knows how, somehow stumbled into journalism, can't really remember how, but I did. I seemed to have an aptitude for it, quite good at it, ended up on the Daily Mirror quite young, then I got headhunted to go and work for Today. I was youngest news editor in Fleet Street, and by now I was pretty much a raving alcoholic, and I was going completely crazy. End up in hospital, and I think my world's coming to an end. I had a very, very bad psychotic breakdown. I was hearing voices, I was imagining things, hallucinating, all sorts of stuff, really bad. I get out of hospital. I was up in Scotland, came back to Heathrow, had a kind of panic attack, couldn't face going into London, actually came down to the West Country, green fields, all that stuff, stayed with some friends. Slowly rebuilt myself. But the key moment was actually getting a phone call out of the blue from my old boss at the Mirror, a guy called Richard Stott, who sadly is now dead, and actually who in later life, edited my diaries. And so the phone goes, answer the phone, and it's Richard, and he's quite an abrasive sort of character. He says, "I hear you've gone mad." I said, "Well, not very well. I mean, I've been in hospital, and I've got a few things, and I'm off work." And he said, "Well, I'll tell you what to do." I was working with Eddie Shah at Today newspaper, no longer exists. Do you remember the one that had the funny pictures that didn't quite work? And I said, "Yeah, I'm not very well." And he said, "Well, look, I'll tell you what to do. Take the money while you're there, stay on the sick for as long as you need to, and the minute you feel better, come back here, because you should never have left in the first place." Now, the reason that was such a big thing for me was because inside me, I felt my life was finished. I felt I was a rising star, and I crashed, and I could see no way back at all. So that was a big, big moment. And it also meant that he didn't define me by what everybody else at the time was defining me by, which is, this guy's gone crazy. He defined me by what he knew me to be, having known me for some time previously. And then the second employer, who I think had a very enlightened view, was Tony Blair, because I go back into political journalism, back at the Mirror, and then actually I went back to Today under a different ownership, and I was assistant editor in charge of politics there. And then I think it was 20 years ago last week, John Smith died, and Tony Blair became leader of the Labour Party and asked me to work for him. And I said no. People, because I'm always described as, ultra loyal and all the rest of it, I actually said no. And one of the reasons I said no was that, well, lots of reasons. My partner, Fiona, was opposed. My parents were opposed. Most of my friends thought it was a crazy idea. Neil Kinnock, who knew a bit more than most about what the job would entail, told me I was completely insane, I shouldn't do it. And so that was kind of where I was at the start, and I said no. Tony is quite a persuasive guy. We went down to France on holiday, and there was, at the back of my mind, I was thinking, do you know what, I should do this, but everybody's telling me not to, so let's just see how it goes. Tony and Cherie and the kids and his mother-in-law turned up at our place in France, where we were on holiday with Neil and Dennis Kinnock. It was, I promise you, whenever you hear that phrase on Watchdog, holiday from hell, this was the holiday from hell. Because in one room, I had Neil and Fiona trying to talk me out of it, and in this room, I had Tony and Cherie trying to talk me into it. And the mother-in-law sort of wandering around, I don't know. And I thought, anyway, the mother-in-law eventually had to go off somewhere, so I had to drive her down to Marseille Airport. Tony came along, thinking, get him on his own, bend his ear on the way back, blah, 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 blah. So we go off, we drop the mother-in-law off, we're driving back, and I think, right, I owe it to him to tell him all the things about me and my life that could become a problem for him. Now, I've known him for years, he knows all about, he knew I had a breakdown, knew I had a drink problem, knew that I used to be a bit kind of, how can we put it, punchy when I was a bit drunk. Used to write pornography, I mean, stuff that could be difficult for him. And I thought I also owe it to him to tell him about the nature of my breakdown, because, I cracked up under pressure. When you say, I never understood why they used to call it cracking up until I cracked up. Now I completely understand why it's called cracking up. And you mentioned the book All in the Mind. There's a scene in there where somebody cracks up, and that is quite autobiographical. You imagine your mind is a plate glass window. It's very, very precious. You can see inside your own mind. There's all these different colors, and it's literally coming apart. And the moment that I cracked up, the reason why I was arrested, I was with Neil Kinnock in Scotland. I was doing a piece for the paper. And it was the weekend that the Swedish Prime Minister, Olof Palme, had been assassinated. So there was a lot of security around left-wing leaders. And I'm cracking up. There's this stuff going off in my head. And I'm starting to feel a bit weird. I thought, I've got a phone home, pre-mobiles. I find somewhere, I said, can you give me an office with a phone? Puts me in this office, I've got the phone. I phone home, no reply. I phone my mum, no reply. I phone my brother, no reply. I phone my sister, no reply. I phone all my friends, no reply, no reply, no reply. I'm starting to feel a little bit isolated as well as edgy. Of course, it works out, you need to do 9 for an outside line. And if you press 0, you got the switchboard, and it was Friday night and there's nobody there. So I'm now starting to feel really, really, really quite edgy. And when the explosion happened in my head, because inside my head, in my mind, I was bleeding everywhere, I'm going like this. If ever you see somebody standing in a street or anywhere going like this, you think they're crazy, right? Well, I was, but I thought I was bleeding and I couldn't understand. I'm going like that. Why is there no blood when I'm bleeding inside? So these 2 coppers came over, plainclothes policemen, very nice, and they just, this is the first time I admitted I might have a problem. This policeman said, are you okay? And I said, you know what, I don't think I am. And he said, do you think you should come with us? I said, yeah, I think I should. That was it. Off I go. Hamilton Police Station. Took all my clothes off. Don't ask me why, but I did. Took all my clothes off. Policeman comes in, says, and I'm now, a lot of politics going on in here. Anybody who said to me, are you all right, which they do tend to say when you're kind of doing stuff like that, are you all right? I thought they were saying, are you right wing? So I would say, no. No, I'm not. And they, okay. So this guy says, can I get you a drink? And I said, I'd like a bottle of your finest champagne, if I may. Off he goes, comes back with a can of Iron Brew, says, I'm afraid that's all I've got. And anyway, so I'm telling Tony all this, and I'm telling him as well that I could hear bagpipes on this part of my head, I could hear brass bands, Diana Ross was singing, very nicely, theme from Mahogany, that was all going off. A few rows. Me and Fiona were kind of having a bit of a row over this bit and rows in the office. That's all going on. You listen to all that at once. And it feels very, very real. Anyway, I told Tony all this. And when I got to the bagpipes and the brass band and Diana Ross going at the same time, he sort of did the Bambi look. You know, the one that goes... But he then said, when I got to the end of that, I said, so what do you think of that? He said, oh, I'm not bothered. I said, what if I'm bothered? He said, I'm still not bothered. Now, when we did the Time to Change campaign, that was used on a poster that was put all over the London Underground. I'm not bothered. What if I'm bothered? I'm still not bothered. Because he was going to be not just my employer, he was almost certainly at that time going to be the next Prime Minister, and I thought that was a very important signal to send. And I think the reason why I emphasise it's so important for employers is because ultimately, I think that's where the change is going to come from. This isn't actually a campaign about legislation. Now, it's certainly a campaign about money, and with all the cuts going on in the health service, I regret to say that the mental health services are the first in the line to get cut. Why is that? Because they're not sexy. If you're a health commissioner and you've got your little slabs of money that you're going to have to make cuts, and you've got cancer over here, you've got children's services, you've got A&E there, and you've got mental health services. What's going to go first? And that's happening piecemeal, slowly, all around the country, and it's important that we realise that's going on and fight to stop it. But it's not just about money, it is actually about attitudes. Some of the great campaigns, they're about the way that people think. Some of the best things that governments do actually don't cost money at all. I mean, I'm very proud of what the Labour government did in relation to investment in the health service, more doctors, more nurses, more hospitals. But do you know what probably saved more British lives than anything else? Was the smoking ban. The fact that we stood up to the tobacco industry, which had had governments in hock for so long, and eventually says, here we are sitting in this room now, there's not a single person in this room who's even thought of lighting up a cigarette. Whereas when I was at university, even at lectures, people would, lecturers wandering around with fags, students smoking and all the rest of it. So you make change in lots of different ways. And if I think about the really great campaigns that you look back through history, one of my favourite films of all time is Milk, the film about Harvey Milk, the gay rights campaign. I don't know if anybody has seen it, but you see it, Not just because of the gay rights issue, but actually for what it says about campaigning. Here's a film where it starts with Harvey Milk, who's kind of a bit flamboyant and dresses very brightly, and it's California in quite a few decades ago, and him and his friends, and they're all a bit camp, and they're all a bit effete, and they wander around the place, and they get beaten up, because that's what happened to gay people if they were openly gay in California at that time. The film ends, after a very interesting story, it ends with Harvey Milk on the steps of Congress as an elected representative, and Congress has just passed the first piece of gay rights legislation, and he's a hero. Now, the reason why I like that story as an arc of campaign is because you can't tell where the change came. It's impossible to work out where the change came. The change didn't come when the legislation was passed, because the legislation wouldn't have been passed if the change hadn't already happened in people's minds. And if you think about women's rights, it's why I get so angry when you hear young women in particular saying, I can't be bothered to vote, they're all saying blah, 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 blah. And you just think, what women had to do to earn the right to vote around the world. And that campaign, again, people throwing themselves in front of horses, that would have been part of it, but it's actually just about people making arguments that eventually, if you keep making the argument, keep going, eventually you can make change happen. And so women's rights, that campaign's not, I think it's won in terms of, in the eyes of the law, men and women are equal, but I think this whole, I've got a young daughter, she's 21, and she's into this kind of next wave of feminism, which I think is really, really interesting, the idea that men and women are legislatively equal, but actually still lots of change that has to happen. And that, again, has to be campaigned for. And then if you think about the great campaigns for racial equality, although we've had Nelson Mandela died recently. And, I mean, just think about, okay, South Africa's still got huge problems, but just think about the change that there has been in that one country, and think about how many millions and millions and millions of people made that happen. I mean, that is why when people say, getting involved in politics, nothing changes, it never makes a difference. It's complete and total nonsense. Things only get changed if you make them change. If we actually all decide never to do anything that's innovative, that's new, that's different, then we all just stay the same. And we'll just sort of, okay, let's just live with all these problems. So something like the anti-apartheid movement, I mean, it's, the guy had died, and he's sort of the biggest legend of our lifetime. But I mean, some of the tributes that were made by some of the people on the right in politics on the day Mandela died, I mean, you wanted to reach for a sick bucket. But though they had been people standing in the way of a campaign which eventually won. So yes, South Africa's still got problems, but it is a democracy. There is a majority rule, black people can vote. So all these campaigns, they don't happen overnight, they take time. And this, I think this is a campaign. The reason why I put it in the same bracket is because we're talking about a really big taboo. A taboo is where people feel they can't really say things. That's where a taboo kind of comes from. So I was at a conference the other day with the Royal College of Nursing. Lots of nurses there. I was talking about mental health. And a nurse got up in the Q&A and she said, look, it's all right for you. You're quite well known. You get paid to do things. You don't have to worry about where your next meal's coming from, blah, blah, blah. I'm a young nurse. We don't get paid that much. I've got a young family. I want to have another kid. My husband doesn't earn very much. And I want to go for promotion. I know that if I had, and I talked to her afterwards, she did, if I had a mental health problem and I was on medication and I were to be open about that, I don't think I'd get that promotion. Now, that's in the National Health Service. And funny enough, the Time to Change campaign, the National Health Service were one of the slowest to sign up to it as an employer. So, and that's real. So I don't criticize that woman at all. I don't criticize anybody who doesn't want to be open, because I know the stigma is real. However, it will only change if bit by bit by bit we are able to be more open. And I think we've got to get to a point where we feel we can be just as open about our mental health as we are about our physical health. And I was saying to the students I met earlier that when I was growing up, I can remember I grew up in Keighley in Yorkshire, and one of my dad's friends got diagnosed with cancer, and it was called the Big C. Why was it called the Big C? Because people didn't want to say cancer. Cancer was a taboo. Now, cancer is no longer a taboo. If you get cancer, it's a horrible disease, and lots of people get it. But if you're sitting on a train, and you sit up, somebody gets on the train, and it's a woman who takes her hat off, and she's completely bald, you know what's going on. And we talk about it, and you've got the language, and you know what to say. If somebody hobbles into work and they're on crutches, and the day before they weren't, and they've got a cast on their ankle, what happened to you? Fell down the stairs, broke my ankle playing football. Oh, what happened to there? And you talk about it. Somebody comes and says, I've got depression, or I think I should see a doctor because I feel really, really bad. Most people don't say that because of the taboo. And I met a woman recently. This was tragic, this story, right? But it just shows you what can happen when a taboo runs deep into a society. So this woman, single parent, 2 kids, and she gets depression. She wakes up one morning, she feels absolutely terrible. She can't get out of bed. Her older daughter comes in and says, what's going on, Mum? She says, oh, I feel really bad. She says, will you do me a favour? Can you phone my work and tell them that your sister's ill? Okay? So the daughter phones the work and says her younger sister is ill and she's having to stay off with her because she can't go to school. She then has to go and see the younger girl and say, you're going to have to take the day off. Because if you go to school, somebody at work who knows that I'm off, because they think that you're ill, they might see you, and then da-da-da-da. So what have you got there? You've got a dynamic of 3 people having to live a lie because a woman who would be totally open about falling over and breaking her ankle, totally open about influenza, totally open about cancer, cannot say to her employer, or doesn't want to say, doesn't feel able to say, I have a really bad episode of depression. It also means she won't go and see a doctor. Now, it's kind of medieval when you think about it. And I think when we took, the other thing that's happened in this area is that the medical profession itself, you know, being a GP or being a dentist, that's a really stressful job, okay? Why would we imagine there aren't quite a few GPs and dentists who have mental health problems? I've got a friend who's a psychiatrist. All his patients are GPs and dentists. A lot of them, whether it's depression, addiction, whatever it might be. And you were saying when you were studying to be a doctor, 6-year course, psychiatry sort of tagged on at the end. And yet, the body is pretty complicated, but the mind is the most complicated part of the body. So how have we got ourselves into a situation? We, by the way, who are one of the better countries at this, we actually who have a better understanding of this than a lot of countries, but yet still I think we're way, way, way behind where we need to be. And I think we've got to get to a position where we feel we can be as open about our mental health as we are about our physical health. And I'll say this about my own experience. I mean, I've had lots of flack down the years. I've had lots of criticism from the press and what have you. But on this, both press and public, I've actually found very, very understanding, very, very supportive. And I think that says something about why we can be kind of working towards a tipping point where this thing can change. Because campaigning, I'm a great believer in the tipping point theory of campaigning. That's why I say you can't tell in the Harvey Milk film when the change came. But the change will come if we all understand, every time we say it, talk about it, every time we go and get out there and we're open about it, you're just making a little change. Every single person can just land a little drop of water and eventually another one and another one, and it becomes a river and it becomes a flood, and then woof, all the old gates go away and we think, you know, God, did we really used to think like that? Did we really used to think in these kind of weird, outmoded ways? And I think that the Time to Change campaign, what I really like about the Time to Change campaign, it's not about services. Nobody gets any pills, no hospitals get built, no nurses get paid from it. It's about understanding you can actually make change by changing the way that people think, by changing the language that we use to talk to each other, by changing our understanding of an issue that affects every single one of us. So if I say, for example, I won't embarrass people here, hands up anybody who doesn't know somebody that they think might have a mental health problem. Right. Just the same as all of us have had a physical health problem at some time. So I just think we're kind of living in the dark ages when we all know that to be true, and yet the taboo and the stigma still exists, and it's still so strong that a mother feels she has to get her daughter to lie for her about her other daughter, and then get that second daughter to live the lie. That is just a crazy, crazy world. So I campaign on this, partly because I know about it, partly because I'm out there and I kind of had no choice. I've got to be honest, when I had that conversation with Tony Blair, when I finally took the job, I said, we had a little sweepstake in the office about which would be the first of the stories I told him about that we'd get asked about by the press. My breakdown, my alcoholism, my pornography, or my fighting at football matches. Okay? And the answer was 2 hours, news of the world, all 4. So, and that again, I'm still standing, I'm still here, and that's the other thing. I think one of the things we don't teach kids enough is the idea of resilience, what you can get through, what you can survive, what you can endure. And I wrote the little memoir you talked about, The Happy Depressive. Maybe this is a bit Presbyterian, but I've never felt that life is about being happy all the time. I think life can be about the pursuit of happiness, but actually I think life often is about struggle, trying to make change, and you get fulfillment when you try to make change and you make that change come about. That's what campaigning is all about. That's why I do this one. I hope that some of you are interested enough to get involved, as some of you already are, and understand that campaigns are movements and they make change that matters over time. Thank you.
Alastair, thank you very much. Okay. There's a really neat message there for all us historians in the audience. From
You're a historian.
No, I am, but I'm a historian as well. Personally and politically, the message is it's always time to change. Always time to make an effort to change.
Is it?
Well, I thought that's what
I didn't say. Did I say that?
I'm a historian reading into it.
This is what spin doctors do.
Spin doctors. I'm reading.
Listen to me, not him.
I'm reading into it what a historian would love to read into it, and that is, it is always time to change. We have some time for some questions. Yeah.
Now, do we need microphones for Cornwall? I'm worried about Cornwall.
We have some here.
Got a nice theatre in Cornwall. Here, we're down here. And then why don't you find the next one? Yeah? Don't worry about me. There's one there.
There's one there.
Okay.
I was really interested in what you said about employers and how employers deal with people who have issues. But I know a lot of young people who have issues.
Yeah.
They understand it.
Yeah.
The school system doesn't.
Yeah.
And that's setting up problems for the future.
Yeah, agreed.
And I don't know what the answer is for that.
I think it's all in the same space. I think some schools are very, very good. I think some teachers are fantastic. Some head teachers are fantastic. I think a lot of it is down to individuals. But I was saying to the students I met earlier, I think the next generation gets this, understands it.
They absolutely do.
Right.
But the schools don't.
Right. But some schools do. Doesn't. Some schools do. But my point is that next generation, a bit like your problem about the challenge, you're not too old, by the way.
Thank you.
And that's a very bad attitude to take.
Say.
Well, it's a very bad attitude to take, because once you're into the comfort zone, you've had it.
I take the point.
Yeah. So I think that the next generation is pushing this already.
I think it's wonderful in one way because they are, but sad for them in a way that they're being held back from doing it.
I agree. But a lot of this is about leadership. You go into some schools and they're brilliant at this. And that would be about leadership. It would be about a head teacher or a teacher, somebody who understands how important this is, and they get into it. But I think the teachers, teachers are under so much pressure anyway. And I think it's difficult sometimes for them to feel that they have to act as kind of mental health ambassadors and, if you like, doctors and looking into the family backgrounds and all the rest of it. But I've been in some schools where they're brilliant at this stuff.
Abby?
Yeah. Now you find the next one.
Some at the back.
No, this lady.
So I was wondering if you think that maybe some of the stigma that arises around mental health is because of this idea that mental health problems can be chronic and lifelong, whereas physical health problems, you know, like you say, you go to the doctor and quite often it's fixed.
Yeah.
And that's not the case in mental health always. So do you think that that possibly contributes to everyone's lack of willingness to talk about it?
That's interesting. It might do. By the way, I've got down my trousers a bag, and I'm going to sign it and give it. This is this thing from Double Elephant, where you get the time to change message there, and then you can go over the road. Is it still open after? Oh, that's bloody good, isn't it? You get all these people in, and anyway, and then you can do this printing thing, and I'll sign it and give it to the best question, which you're winning so far. But you might, somebody else might, you know. No, that is a really interesting question. I think the answer is no. I mean, there are chronic, incurable physical ailments around which there isn't stigma. Some of them there is stigma. So I don't think that's the issue. I think the stigma comes from misunderstanding, fear. This is where most stigma comes from. You know, why is there a stigma around, why is there such a ridiculous, nonsensical debate in this country about immigration? Because it's an easy thing about which to generate fear. So I think a lot of it comes from fear, ignorance, and shame. And I think that's the real thing with it, is that if you've got the generation that you're talking about that thinks that there's something somehow shameful about having somebody in the family who's got a mental health problem. And then if you take it, you mentioned my latest book, which is about, I'm sorry they're not here, by the way, because then you could have bought them, and I'd happily have signed them. But the latest one's about alcohol, and it starts on the day a girl's born and ends, she's 18 in rehab. And when I published it, it got very, very good reviews, but one of them said, oh God, the zeal of the convert, is he really saying we've got 18-year-old alcoholic girls in this country? And I wrote to him, I said, come with me to this hospital I was up in Bolton a week earlier, and I will introduce you to 4 who are in there now. Now, I think that within a family, if you have a young person who's got a problem with alcohol, how do most families react to that? Not like they had, not if it was cancer. And it's very hard. I mean, I know, look, I've had my own issues with alcohol. When I get friends who've got problems with alcohol, and there's a big part of you that says, you know, just stop it and just pull yourself together. Even I do that. But it's an illness. It's just the same as, you know. So I think that's where the stigma comes from. It's that fear and it's that sense of shame. So I don't think it's because of it's the long term of it, nature of it.
A couple of questions up at the back.
Yep. And then that microphone. You find the next one. This one right at the back with a shirt. I think we should have at least one man ask a question.
In terms of changing the way people think, do you think the root lies in educating people from a really young age? So, for example, sex used to be quite a taboo to talk about, and now people are educated about sex from, I don't know, 9 or 10 by their schools. So do you think, for example, I didn't actually become aware of mental illness as a thing till I was about 14.
Right.
And I was never educated about it in school.
Yeah.
So do you think that's kind of one way to go?
I think it is a way to go, and I think it has to be part of a bigger, what I would call the normalisation of debate about illness. I'll tell you one of the groups and the students I was talking to is doing a thing about media and mental health. And then now this thing, the annual Mental Health Media Awards, there's a lot of good stuff in the media. There's a lot of bad stuff, but there's a lot of good stuff. And some of the best stuff actually comes in the kind of drama, soap opera sphere. That's a really important way of educating people. If you can have really good, I mean, positive is the wrong word, but if you can have accurate portrayals of what an illness is and how some people can deal with it and cope with it and the treatments for it, that can be incredibly powerful. But certainly within schools, I mean, it goes back to the point about the taboo. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you talk about it and teach it in schools when it's going to be a part of their lives and already is? Because the other really, really big problem, there's a charity that's been set up for this now, children growing up in the homes of mentally ill parents. It's a huge issue. You know, whether that's addiction, whether it's bipolar, your parent is bipolar. I mentioned the mother of these two young kids. So that kid, when, you know, and the mum gets better and she does go back to school, and she can't talk about it because nobody talks about it.
Yeah, I just think with education, it's just, I agree with you in that everyone should know from really young. Because, for example, I've suffered from depression, and I found out when I was 14, but I just thought before that, what's wrong with me? Because no one had told me what it was. So I really think that people need to be able to be like, treat it the same as physical illness and be like, oh, well, this might happen to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. So you just landed a drop of water, you see.
Yes.
Oh, there, sorry, yeah, white T-shirt. I actually meant that guy over there, but sorry, you took a long walk and...
Oh, that's fair enough. I'm not from Cornwall either, by the way. I'm North Devon, which is, yeah, that way.
No, Cornwall. I was pointing at Cornwall. There's the screen behind you.
Oh, is that?
That's Cornwall. Wave again, Cornwall.
Oh, hello, Cornwall. Okay. Didn't realise that.
It wasn't you. Don't take it personally.
Oh, right, okay. Well, hello, Cornwall from Exeter. Okay, Alastair, it's good to see you again. I've heard you speak a couple of times, and you may be aware I'm the Time to Change coordinator for the South West and have been since the start of the campaign. And about 9 or 10 years ago, having spent some time in a secure hospital, I came out and decided there weren't many people queuing up to offer me jobs, so I went self-employed and started a little business called Positive Notions. I became involved with Time to Change, and I suppose I haven't really got a question. I just wanted to make a couple of points on what you've said. One is about the Time to Change campaign in general. Mm-hmm. And I heard that we heard that it's always good to sort of say time to change. It's interesting that prior to the last election, Gordon Brown refused to stand in front of a big poster that said time to change. And I just thought that was maybe a little sign of things to come. But anyway, aside from that, I want to also end a little bit on a positive message. I work for an organisation called Recovery Devon. And in terms of what we believe is in the recovery approach, which is something that can work alongside the medical model, as it's sometimes known, and we're not completely anti-medication, but we believe a lot of people have the ability and the knowledge and the experience to help themselves through a mental health issue, problem, challenge. And to do that, they can employ things like mindfulness, wellness recovery action plans, a whole variety of self-help techniques that don't always involve, well, we know there is no magic pill and there is no magic psychologist, psychiatrist. That
I don't think we should be anti-medication. I'm slightly worried about this. There's a slightly growing kind of anti-medication thing at the moment. You've got to be a bit careful about that. But I agree with you about the whole broader mindfulness stuff.
Actually, my first breakdown occurred at Sandhurst. I was a top flyer at school. I went to Welbeck College prior to Sandhurst, had a major breakdown there, diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. And in terms of the positive story I'd like to give, I've been in work virtually all my adult life, apart from some time spent in secure services. And it was back in 91 or 1990 that I applied to be a fireman with Devon Fire and Rescue Service. It took about 18 months because I disclosed my diagnosis that I was on medication. I have been sectioned over the years quite a few times as well. And I became a firefighter for my little town in South Molton and spent 8 years doing that, cutting people out of cars, rescuing people from fires, etc. Wonderful years. And that's with a diagnosis of schizophrenia and fully disclosed and being on medication.
Good. Very big drop of water.
Well, I'm not looking for a round of applause.
Give him a round of applause.
Oh. Thanks.
Right, the guy over there who's the one I meant. Yeah.
Hi. Well, I wanted to ask a question. In my family, we've had a lot of problems with mental health. My brother especially has grown up with suffering from autism, which on the one hand is a horrible big problem when it comes to interacting with other people, but it's one of those things that you can see almost. You can't see it like a broken leg, but you can tell when someone's suffering. But in my family recently, my mum who's a nurse, had a mental breakdown, a serious bout of depression. And she suffered that for about 6 months before anyone could even picked up on it. After working so hard on the health service in the NHS, which have been absolutely amazing, helping her get better as a result. But the one problem was with depression, it is such a hard thing to see. I mean, she had it for such a long time and no one in her family, no one who knew her noticed. So I want to know, what do you think we can do about depression itself as a problem, or a way of recognising and even just talking about it with someone else? And we can talk about autism, we can talk about some things, but I always find it really difficult just to talk about depression itself.
Okay, we just did. I mean, I think it's. I think awareness is the most important thing. Awareness and knowledge, and people knowing, having some sense of what it is and some sense of what it's not. And funny enough, when I wrote my first novel, All in the Mind, there's 2 scenes in there. There's a couple of really bad depressives, and one in particular. And Charlie Faulkner, who's and who's a very good friend of mine, who was in the Labour cabinet, and he's one of the happiest blokes you could ever meet. He's just got, and he's just always the same bubbly, buoyant personality. And he said to me, he said, "You know what, I read your book." He says, "I think it's the first time I've ever kind of understood what depression's like." And that meant a lot to me, because I think part of why I've written it is not just to show people who are depressed what it's like, because they know, although it'll always be different from one person to another. But I think this, I mentioned the soaps when I was talking about, the media. I think this cultural space is really, really, really important on this. I think that, because there's 2 ways, one of the few times I've had to kind of take Tony Blair, or not when I've had to, but when I did take him to task publicly, was when he wrote his autobiography. And he said some very, very nice things about me, right? He said I was a genius. That was very nice. He said he couldn't have done it without me. Yeah, fair enough. But he also said this thing. He said that I had this whole history of mental health stuff, and he knew about it, and he didn't think it blah, blah, blah. And he said, in my experience, there are 2 kinds of crazy people. There's the one who is like, it gives them extra energy and extra verve and extra creativity, and that was me. And then the others, they're just crazy. And the reason I did sort of take him to task is it's not like that. And I think there's a real danger that actually we look at the kind of, Stephen Fry, Ruby Wax, so then you go through history and you think all the amazing kind of creative geniuses that had real mental health problems. And there's a danger that we sort of think that's kind of what mental illness is. But actually, for most people, there's very little upside. There's very little upside to if you're struggling financially, if you're really struggling to hold a marriage together, hold a home together, something, and you've got chronic depression, there's not much upside. You're not writing great music, you're not writing great plays, you're not doing amazing paintings, you're just really ill. And so I think we've got to be careful on that. But I do think that cultural space is really, really important, because that's then what fuels the sort of conversations that people have. But I think the fact that you can talk about it, it's interesting, you can talk about it when you say you can't, and you just, in front of a few hundred people, you've talked about it. That's what we've got to do. That's what we're going to get to and break it down. Eventually, you'll break down the stigma. Yeah.
Some questions down at the end. Come down at the front here.
Then if you find the next one, just...
Okay, thank you.
Is not part of the problem that people don't...
Cornwall as well.
Sorry?
One question from Cornwall in a moment.
Oh, we've got a question from Cornwall.
Far away.
Oh, wicked.
One question here, thank you.
Yeah.
Is not one of the problems that people do not know how to deal with mental illness? There's a fear there. A parent with a child who has mental illness knows how to cope with flu, but most parents are at a loss to know how to deal with it. Similarly, if you meet somebody on the bus who is talking to themselves and tries to involve you, the average person just doesn't know how to cope with that. And doesn't there need to be greater publicity to simple methods of coping with that kind of situation? Doesn't that need to be part of the campaign?
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. In fact, the Time Change do there is, you go on the website, there is literature about how you can, you know, what you should, what you shouldn't do. But ultimately, you know, you mentioned, say, that thing about when you see somebody on the bus, they're an individual. They might not want to be helped. They might not want you to talk to them. You just don't know. I think but I think if we have a greater sense of awareness, yeah, absolutely. But I think I mean, we're all making the same point here. We're talking about education, we're talking about awareness, we're talking people having a sense of the language, the body language that you should use when you see somebody who you think is in distress, and whether there's something useful you can do to help them. In my experience, usually there is. Even if it's only to find out they don't want you there. I think actually, you know, if you see somebody who's upset, distressed, I think there's no harm in seeing whether there's some help you can give. If you can't, you can't.
We have only time for one more question, Alastair.
Oh, last question, I'm afraid. I'll be hanging around for a bit. Oh, no, she had got the microphone. 2 questions, that one and that one, yeah. Okay. Cornwall.
Yeah, okay.
Hi, thank you. I really enjoyed your talk, and I think what you're doing is incredibly important. I just wanted to raise the point about the precariousness of the contemporary workplace, and the way that that our lives have become so full of uncertainty and short-term contracts. And these kind of things, which on the one hand cause us more stress because of the uncertainty of of our lives and the sort of lack of kind of security blankets, if you like, but also on the other hand means that we become far less willing than we might have otherwise have been to disclose any kind of problems that we've got to our employers, because because regardless of where we are in the labour market, whether we're unskilled or even professional people, there are always a lot of other people that would really quite like our jobs. So it just becomes much more tricky even so.
Yeah, totally agree. And that's why I say I think it's one of those issues where there's got to be a kind of cultural leap together on this. Employers are fundamental. I said that right at the start. Employers are fundamental to this. One of the spin-offs from Time to Change is a thing we do called Dine to Change, where we go and have dinners with employers and we try to persuade them. I mean, you've got to be careful, positive discrimination and all that stuff. Actually persuade them to find people who are open about a mental health problem and take them on. And you will find, there's a brilliant book, by the way, an American-Iranian psychiatrist called Nasser Ghami, Ghami. He's written a book called First Rate Madness. And it's about the amazing people throughout history and in the world today who have achieved with mental illness. And there's the obvious that we all know about: Churchill, Abraham Lincoln, Florence Nightingale, Marie Curie, and all that. But actually, if we can, in some ways we've gone backwards from that. We were talking earlier about whether, if a Prime Minister today admitted to having a mental health problem, whether they would be able to do that job. Now, there was a Norwegian Prime Minister who actually admitted to having a really bad depression and wanted to resign, and his cabinet wouldn't let him. It's really funny, actually. He took a sabbatical, and he had the highest poll ratings of any Prime Minister in Norwegian history. But I think there will be individual instances of people who might be open, and that might lead to discrimination, and it might lead to them not getting work or not getting promotion. And that will happen, okay? I think there does come a point where there's sort of greater good, and I think that we just have to sort of, I would still encourage people to be open. One, because I think it helps them, and two, because over time, that is what's going to lead to change. But I totally agree with the point that you make. The very, very last question there.
Hiya. Regarding the comments that Tony Blair made about the 2 types of crazy people and some of the terms that you used in your own speech, what do you think the implications are of language that we use around mental health? Like terms such as crazy and mental can cause more stigma when we're talking about these issues.
No, I agree with that. I mean, I try to be careful. But the reason I use a word like crazy is because that's exactly how I felt. I think even stuff like bonkers. Is that good? Is that bad? Don't know. Jury out on that one for me. Good to be bonkers. Okay. No, but you're right about and if you think about, again, to go back to some of the other campaigns, gay rights, okay, there are certain words that were totally accepted in the language, and now you can't even say them. Or if you think about racial equality, there are certain words you can't even say that people used to say them. Now that's a good thing, and Jeremy Clarkson should have remembered that. And I think within this space, what are words that I think we've really, really got to be careful to avoid? Nutter, headbanger. These are words I think that they've got to be you can't use them. I think that, but at the same time, I think we've got to be careful not to sort of call a spade a spade. Crazy, people understand what that means. I went crazy. I did. Tony Blair saying there's two types of crazy people. I think that's fine. I think it was the explanation that was not fine. But he was still a very, very good Prime Minister and did a lot for the university sector and did a lot for the health service. Thank you.
That is a very fine place to finish. It is now time to finish. I'd like to thank Alastair again. I know that I've been asked to say that you have on your seats feedback cards. Is that right? Somebody told me.
Oh, no,
that we would very much like you. No, they're not rating you. I think they're rating me and the auditorium and things in the event. Okay. If you could fill those in before you go, are people collecting them? Somebody? Yes, good. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you again, Alastair. Fantastic.
Thank you.
That was lovely. Thank you.